The ruins of the old city stretched out like a skeleton, gray and hollow, under a sky that was always dim now, even at midday. Smoke curled from broken buildings, the scent of ash and rot heavy in the air. Cale moved silently through the streets, boots barely touching the cracked pavement, his eyes scanning every corner. Soldiers had been trained to move fast, strike hard, and vanish. Cale, though, was quieter than most. People whispered that he could pass through a battlefield without anyone noticing, that his presence was like a shadow that moved with thought itself. Tonight, he was on a mission, one that no one else could undertake. The humans had received intelligence that a group of vampires had been spotted near this sector. Among them was rumored to be an especially dangerous elder, cunning and cruel. Cale had been briefed for hours. He knew the risks, knew that failure meant death. But this mission wasn't about glory or strategy. It was about survival and about protecting something, or someone, no one else had expected. The streets were silent, except for the occasional groan of wind through broken windows. Cale's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his blade, his ears twitching at every faint sound. It was strange to think that not long ago, humans had feared darkness itself. Now they had grown used to it. Humans had learned to survive when the odds were against them, to adapt when the rules of life changed overnight. That was humanity's greatest strength, the ability to endure, to push forward, to fight not because they wanted power, but because they refused to be taken without a struggle. Cale's mission had seemed straightforward at first. Infiltrate, gather intelligence, return. But intelligence turned out to be more complicated than expected. In the corner of a collapsed building, he found something entirely unanticipated. A small, trembling figure, no taller than a child, her pale skin almost glowing in the dim light. Her eyes were a deep, unnatural red, and her teeth peeked through her lips, tiny fangs that made her look less than human. At first, Cale hesitated. This was not part of the mission. The rules were clear. Any vampire that posed a threat was to be eliminated. Yet something about her stopped him. Maybe it was her size, the fragility in her stance, or perhaps it was the way she looked at him, fear and curiosity battling in those red eyes. She did not attack, did not flee. She simply watched, her tiny body shivering. Cale knelt slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "Are you alone?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The vampire child's lips trembled, but she nodded. Her name, when she finally spoke it, was Lyra. She was lost, abandoned by her own kind after a failed raid. Cale had no orders for this situation. He had been sent to fight, not rescue. And yet he could not leave her there. Survival, Cale knew, was not just about following orders. It was about making choices when no one else could. He carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than expected, her small body fragile against his own. He moved through the streets with practiced ease, avoiding patrols and the more dangerous creatures that stalked the ruins at night. Cale had survived countless battles, but he had never felt as protective of anyone as he did of Lyra in that moment. Perhaps it was because she represented something rare, innocence in a world that had been stripped of it. The journey was not easy. Broken streets, collapsed buildings, and lurking predators made every step dangerous. Lyra whispered questions, her voice barely audible. Why are you helping me?" Cale did not answer immediately. Words were not needed. His actions were enough. Still, after a pause, he said, "Because I can." That was the simplest truth he could offer. It was a human truth. Humans did not always act for reward or recognition. Sometimes they acted because it was the right thing, and they did not need anyone else to understand why. As night fell, the city became even more dangerous. Shadows grew long and thick, and the sounds of predators multiplied. Cale kept Lyra close, moving through alleys and under bridges, always careful not to make a sound. It was exhausting work, but he did not complain. He had survived far worse situations before. Still, he could feel the weight of her small body, the responsibility pressing on him. If she died under his watch, it would not be because of his inability to fight, but because of his inability to protect. That thought was heavier than any blade or gun he had ever carried. They found temporary shelter in the remains of an old warehouse. Broken walls let in the cold night air, but it was safe enough for a moment of rest. Lyra curled up in a corner, her eyes wide and alert, her fangs glinting slightly in the dim light. Cale sat nearby, sharpening his blade and listening. Every creak of wood, every distant sound of movement kept him alert. He had learned long ago that vigilance was survival. But for the first time in years, he felt something more than caution. He felt a strange sense of attachment. Protecting her was no longer a duty, it was personal. Lyra, despite her fear, watched him with curiosity. You don't fear me?" she asked. Cale shook his head. "Fear is useless," he replied. "It doesn't save you, action does." She frowned. She had lived among humans and vampires both, and she had never heard such words. Most humans treated vampires as monsters or prey. Most humans would have killed her without hesitation. Yet here was Cale, carrying her through dangers she could not even name, fighting for her in silence. She did not understand why, but for the first time she felt something she had not felt in a long time: safety. The night was long, and Cale did not sleep. Every noise was a threat, every shadow a potential ambush. Lyra, sensing his vigilance, remained silent. The human mind had a way of predicting danger, Cale knew, but it also had a way of adapting. Where creatures like vampires relied on instinct and hunger, humans relied on thought, strategy, and endurance. That combination had allowed humanity to survive countless threats, and it had allowed Cale to protect her, even in the face of overwhelming danger. As dawn approached, the first light weakly piercing the broken city, Cale allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Humanity had not survived because it was the strongest or the fastest. Humans had survived because they made choices when others would freeze, because they acted for reasons beyond survival or orders, and because they endured when others gave up. Cale realized in that quiet moment that he was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something more, a chance to prove that human courage and compassion could shine even in the darkest world. Lyra stirred beside him, her small hand brushing his arm. You saved me," she whispered. "Yes," Cale replied softly, "and I will keep doing it. No matter what comes." For the first time in the long months of conflict and ruin, he allowed himself a small smile. It was not a smile of victory or triumph, but of resolve. He had chosen to protect her, not because he was ordered to, but because he understood what it meant to care for another life. That choice, simple as it seemed, was humanity at its finest. The ability to act with courage, compassion, and purpose even when everything around you was chaos. By the time the sun rose, they were on the move again. Cale had mapped a path to a nearby human-safe zone, a place where Lyra could be sheltered, and where he could gather the intelligence he had originally been sent to collect. Yet the mission had changed. Saving her had become the priority. Every step they took was a quiet rebellion against the cruelty and indifference of the world. As they moved through the shattered streets, Lyra began to speak more, asking about humans, about life before the darkness, about why Cale had become a soldier. He answered simply, not with stories of glory or heroism, but with truths about survival, resilience, and the choices humans made when everything seemed lost. Lyra listened intently, her small mind absorbing every word. For her, Cale was no longer just a protector. He was a guide, a teacher, and the first person who had ever shown her kindness without expectation. In a world where vampires took what they wanted and humans fought only to survive, this quiet soldier was something extraordinary. Hours later, they reached the outskirts of the city. The air was cleaner here, the remnants of nature struggling to reclaim what had been destroyed. Cale set Lyra down and scanned the horizon. Patrols and dangers still lurked, but the path forward was clear. For now they were safe. For now she was alive. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide. Will you stay with me?" she asked, the small voice full of hope and fear. Cale knelt beside her. "I will stay as long as I'm needed," he said. His voice was steady, calm, but it carried a promise. He had risked everything to protect her, and he would continue to do so, no matter the cost. In that quiet moment among the ruins of a fallen city, an unspoken bond was formed. Cale, the quietest soldier, and Lyra, the tiny vampire, had found something rare. A connection beyond fear, beyond species, beyond orders. It was a bond built on trust, courage, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As they moved onward, Cale knew that their journey was only beginning. The world was vast and dangerous, filled with enemies both human and supernatural. But as long as they had each other, there was hope. Hope that humanity, in its quiet determination, could stand against any darkness. Hope that compassion and courage could survive even in the most broken places. And as Lyra walked beside him, small but determined, Cale understood something he had never thought about before. Protecting her was not just a duty, it was a choice A human choice, a choice that defined them both. In the silence of the ruined city, they moved forward, shadows against the broken light, carrying with them the quiet power of humanity. The early morning mist clung to the ruins as Kale and Lyra continued their cautious trek through the outskirts of the city. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and decay. Lyra's tiny hands clutched at Kale's sleeve, hesitant yet trusting, her red eyes alert to every shadow. The previous night had left a mark on both of them, Kale with exhaustion pressed into his bones, and Lyra with the quiet realization that this human, so quiet, so determined, was now her protector. She could feel it in her chest, a warmth she had never experienced among vampires, a strange safety that made her small heart beat faster. Kale moved deliberately, scanning the landscape for any signs of danger. Humans were not the only threat in these ruins. Creatures that had adapted to the dark ruled the outskirts. Vampire scouts, hungry and relentless, could appear at any moment, yet Kale's training and instincts were precise. He had survived countless battles, not by brute strength alone, but by patience, strategy, and observation. Every movement, every turn of the head, every subtle pause was calculated. He understood the enemy, understood the risk, and most importantly, understood what it meant to protect a life that was not his own. Lyra's small voice broke the silence. Why do you keep going? You could just run, you could leave me." Kale did not answer immediately. His eyes scanned a nearby alley before he crouched beside her. "Running doesn't solve anything," he said finally. "Survival isn't about escaping. It's about moving forward, facing what comes, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Lyra frowned, unsure if she understood, but she nodded. She had lived in fear for so long that the idea of facing danger intentionally was foreign. Yet there was something in Kale's steady gaze, the way his quiet determination radiated without a word, that told her he was serious. Humans, she realized, had a strange strength, not in speed, not in strength, but in the courage to act when others froze. As they moved, the city's ruins gave way to patches of wilderness reclaiming the land. Crumbling buildings were replaced by trees pushing through concrete, vines curling around rusted metal. Nature, even in a broken world, found a way to survive. Kale admired it silently. Humanity, he thought, was the same. No matter how much the world tried to crush it, humans endured. They adapted. They survived. And sometimes they fought not for conquest, but for those who could not fight for themselves. Lyra, watching him, began to understand. She had known vampires who killed for pleasure, humans who survived for power, but Kale was different. He acted not out of desire or fear, but out of choice. He chose to protect her, and that choice, she realized slowly, was rare. By midday, they reached the edge of a shallow river. The water ran clear, a small gift in a world that had lost much of its beauty. Kale knelt, filling a canteen, while Lyra watched, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. "Humans, do you always care about others?" she asked quietly. Kale paused, staring into the water. "Not always, but when it matters, when someone's life depends on it, yes. That's when we find what's truly important." Lyra absorbed this, her fangs glinting slightly in the sunlight. Her own kind had taught her to hunt, to survive by preying on others. But here was a human teaching her something else, something she had never learned. That life could be protected, that kindness could be stronger than violence. Their journey continued, each step bringing new challenges. Shadows moved in the forests, creatures that had grown clever in the absence of human order. Kale led the way, silent and precise, and Lyra followed, trusting his judgment. They moved through thick underbrush, over fallen trees, and past abandoned villages where the echoes of human life had long faded. In these moments, Kale realized that survival was not just about skill. It was about understanding, about anticipating danger, about having the patience to wait for the right moment to act. By late afternoon, they reached the remnants of a small village, half buried in undergrowth. Smoke rose from chimneys, a sign that other survivors lived here. Kale approached cautiously, scanning for threats. The humans here were wary, as they should be. Every encounter with strangers in this world could be life or death. But he had learned how to communicate without words, how to show intention through gesture, posture, and the quiet confidence of his presence. Lyra clung to him as he approached. She could sense the tension, the calculation, the calm that radiated from him. Even in the face of potential danger, Kale moved without fear. He did not need to announce his purpose. His actions spoke for him, and slowly the villagers began to relax. Inside one of the safer homes, Kale offered Lyra a seat by the fire. She hesitated at first, then sank into a chair, still unsure but comforted by his presence. Kale, meanwhile, spoke briefly with the village elder, a woman whose eyes held the weight of years and the knowledge of survival. They exchanged information quickly, locations of threats, the movement of vampires, the routes to safer areas. Kale's quiet efficiency impressed the elder, and she nodded in approval. Lyra, watching him, felt a strange sense of pride. This human, who rarely spoke, who carried the weight of the world in his eyes, was extraordinary. She had never seen humans like this before. Not the ones who killed, not the ones who fled, but the ones who fought quietly, with thought, with purpose, with courage. Kale embodied humanity at its finest. That night, as the village slept, Kale remained on watch. Lyra had grown tired but could not sleep fully, her mind filled with questions about this strange human who had saved her. She whispered softly, Do you ever rest?" Kale did not answer immediately. He knew rest was a luxury they could not always afford. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but not when others need protection." Lyra's eyes widened. She had not heard words like these before. Among her kind, power was taken. Life was measured in strength and cunning. Humans were different. They acted out of choice, out of responsibility, out of courage. And here was one human who had chosen to protect her, not for reward, not for orders, but because he could, and because he knew it was right. Days passed as they stayed in the village. Lyra grew stronger, learning from Kale how to navigate danger, how to listen, how to move without drawing attention. Kale observed her progress quietly, noting her resilience. Even in her small form, she possessed determination, and with guidance, she could survive. Together, they became a strange but effective team. Kale's human ingenuity complemented Lyra's supernatural instincts, and she began to trust him in ways that no one else had ever earned. The bond between them deepened not through words, but through shared experience. Every ambush they avoided, every clever escape, every silent night of watchfulness strengthened their connection. Lyra began to understand that Kale's actions were more powerful than any words. They spoke of courage, of humanity, of the quiet strength that allowed a single soldier to protect a fragile life against impossible odds. Kale, in turn, began to see Lyra not as a vampire, not as a target, but as a companion, a being worthy of protection and respect. Her small victories, her moments of trust, her flashes of courage, they reminded him why he had chosen to act, why he had risked everything to carry her through danger. Humans survived not because they were invincible, but because they had the capacity to care, to act, and to endure. Lyra's presence was a living testament to that principle. One evening, as they patrolled the outskirts of the village, a pack of rogue vampires appeared, drawn by the scent of life. Kale did not hesitate. He positioned himself between Lyra and the approaching threat, moving with precision and calm. Each motion was deliberate. A step to the side, a swing of the blade, a calculated strike. Lyra watched, her heart pounding, as the quiet soldier moved with deadly efficiency, yet without cruelty. He did not kill out of rage, he killed to protect. The vampires were clever, but they underestimated human resilience. Kale's tactics, his understanding of terrain and timing, allowed them to escape with minimal injury. Lyra followed, learning silently, absorbing every movement, every decision. She realized that survival was not just about strength, but about patience, strategy, and courage, qualities that humans, even the quietest ones, carried in abundance. After the confrontation, Kale led Lyra to a hidden clearing where they could rest safely. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Lyra looked up at him, her voice small but earnest. You never stopped. You never gave up." Kale glanced at her, expression calm but eyes intense. "Giving up solves nothing," he said. "We move forward because we can, because we must, and because it is the right thing to do." Lyra nodded slowly. In that moment, she understood something profound. Humans were fragile, yes, but within that fragility was strength. A strength born of choice, of responsibility, of courage. Kale embodied it, and in following him, in trusting him, she was beginning to see the world differently. Night fell completely, and for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to relax. Kale remained alert, but he did not disturb her. In the quiet of the clearing, surrounded by the sounds of night, a fragile but powerful bond had formed. It was not just survival. It was trust, respect. and a shared understanding that in a dangerous world, connection could be a weapon just as strong as any blade. And so, Kale and Lyra continued their journey. Each day brought new challenges, new threats, but also moments of learning, growth, and quiet triumph. They moved together through ruins and forests, through danger and uncertainty, guided not by orders alone, but by something deeper: the human capacity to care, to endure, and to protect. In a world that had forgotten hope, they became a small testament to what humanity could achieve. Not through conquest, not through domination, but through courage, wisdom, and the quiet strength that allowed one soldier to risk everything for another. Lyra's trust was a gift, and Kale's protection was a choice. Together, they exemplified a truth that the world often overlooked: humanity, even in its quietest moments, could be extraordinary. As they settled for the night, the stars faintly visible through the broken canopy of trees, Lyra whispered almost to herself, I think I understand now. Humans, you are strong, stronger than anyone believed." Kale looked at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Strength," he said softly, "is not about power. It's about courage, endurance, and the choice to protect. That is what makes us human." Lyra nodded, her red eyes reflecting the faint starlight. For the first time in her short life, she felt not fear but belonging. She was not alone. She had someone who would fight for her, guide her, and stand with her. And in that realization, even a tiny vampire could understand the greatness of the human spirit. The forest grew darker as Kale and Lyra pressed onward, the sun long since swallowed by thick clouds. Rain had begun to fall lightly, turning the dirt paths into slick mud. Each step required care, but Kale moved with his usual precision, boots silent on the wet ground. Lyra followed closely, her small frame huddled under the hood of a tattered cloak Kale had given her. She was learning quickly, observing his every move, copying his careful steps, his pauses, his constant scanning of the surroundings. They had traveled for days, avoiding vampire patrols and scavenger bands, following the edge of the ruined lands toward a rumored human stronghold. The path was dangerous. Stories of entire villages wiped out by vampires and rogue creatures haunted their journey. Yet Kale never showed hesitation. Even in moments when the forest seemed alive with menace, his calm demeanor never wavered. That calm, Lyra realized, was as much a shield as the sword at his side. "This way," Kale whispered, pointing toward a narrow passage between thick, gnarled trees. He bent low, moving silently. Lyra crouched beside him, her eyes wide and alert. Every sound, every movement carried potential danger. But Kale had taught her to trust observation, to trust preparation, and above all, to trust him. She could feel the weight of his responsibility in every step he took. He wasn't just leading her through the forest, he was carrying the weight of her life. Hours passed with only the occasional rustle of leaves to break the silence. Lyra tried to speak, but Kale shook his head gently. "Not now," he whispered. "Focus. Danger doesn't wait for conversation." She obeyed, gripping his sleeve, letting her instincts align with his. Humans, she was learning, had a patience that vampires often lacked. They could wait, watch, and strike only when the moment was perfect. That patience, she realized, was lethal. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. Kale froze, ears twitching, muscles tensed. Lyra stiffened beside him, heart pounding. From the underbrush, a large predator emerged, its eyes glowing faintly, fangs dripping, claws ready to strike. It moved like water, silent yet deadly. Kale positioned himself between Lyra and the creature, blade at the ready. He did not panic, he never did. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Lyra nodded, barely daring to breathe. The predator lunged, but Kale was faster. He sidestepped, delivering a precise strike that forced the creature back without killing it. It hissed and circled, waiting for another chance. Kale's movements were fluid, controlled, and calculated. He struck not with anger, but with purpose. Lyra's eyes widened. She had seen humans fight before, but never with this level of precision and restraint. The predator lunged again, and Kale's blade met it at the perfect angle, forcing it to retreat. Finally, with a swift motion, Kale disarmed it and forced it into the shadows. The threat was gone for now. You are amazing," Lyra whispered. "How do you do that?" Kale did not answer immediately. He sheathed his blade and looked at her calmly. "Focus, patience, and understanding," he said simply. "Strength alone is never enough. You must know your enemy, know the ground you walk on, and know yourself." Lyra absorbed the words silently, realizing that human strength was not measured in raw power, but in intellect, patience, and courage. Kale's quiet demeanor, his calm and calculated actions, were proof that humanity could survive and even thrive against the deadliest threats. As night fell, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the thick canopy above. Kale found shelter in the hollow of a massive fallen tree, dry enough for them both to rest. Lyra curled up beside him, still wary but comforted by his presence. She had never known anyone who would protect her so completely without expectation, without fear, and without question. Kale stayed awake through the night, scanning the perimeter, listening to the rain, noting the faint sounds of movement in the distance. He thought about the mission ahead, the intelligence they carried, the stronghold they sought, and the increasing threat of vampire forces growing bolder every day. Every decision he made now could mean life or death, not just for him, but for Lyra. In the quiet of the night, Lyra finally spoke. "Kale, why do you care so much about me? I'm not like you." Kale looked at her, expression calm, eyes reflective. "Because you are alive," he said simply. "Because someone has to make the choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It doesn't matter what you are. What matters is the life in front of me and my choice to keep it safe." Lyra considered his words, her small body trembling slightly, not from fear but from the weight of realization. Humans, she understood now, acted not from instinct alone but from principle. They made choices, and those choices defined them. Kale had chosen her. That choice had already changed everything. The next morning they continued their journey. The forest thinned, giving way to open fields dotted with ruined villages and abandoned homes. Kale scanned each structure carefully before entering, searching for supplies or threats. Lyra followed, learning quickly, observing his methods and mimicking his silent movements. She could see now that human survival depended on more than speed or strength. It depended on strategy, caution, and the willingness to endure hardship without complaint. As they approached a small hill, Kale froze. Ahead, a group of vampire scouts moved through the fields, unaware of their presence. Kale crouched, signaling for Lyra to stay low. The scouts were fast and dangerous, but they lacked the patience and strategic thinking of a human mind. Kale calculated their movement, the timing, and the angle of attack. "Follow my lead," he whispered. Lyra obeyed, heart pounding. Kale moved silently, weaving through the tall grass, approaching the scouts from behind. He struck first with precision, using small, controlled movements to incapacitate one scout before the others could react. Lyra, mimicking his actions, helped guide them through the ambush, her small size giving them an advantage. By the time the scouts realized what had happened, Kale and Lyra had disappeared into the shadows. The battle had been brief, controlled, and efficient. No unnecessary violence, no wasted energy, only survival and protection. Lyra looked at Kale in awe. You planned it all, you didn't just fight, you controlled it." Kale nodded. "That is the difference," he said. "Humans survive by thinking, by observing, by choosing the right action at the right time. Strength alone is not enough." They moved on, the bond between them deepening. Each shared victory, each narrow escape, strengthened trust and respect. Lyra began to understand that Kale was more than a soldier. He was a guide, a protector, and a living example of humanity's ability to endure, adapt, and triumph even in impossible circumstances. As they approached the outskirts of a fortified human settlement, the danger intensified. Vampire forces were growing bolder, and rumors of a massive hunt had reached Kale's ears. He knew that entering the settlement would not be simple. The vampires would expect humans to protect their own, and any intrusion could spark a violent confrontation. Kale scouted the perimeter, analyzing patrol patterns, weak points, and possible entry routes. Lyra watched silently, noting every detail. She understood now that Kale's quiet strength was not just physical. It was strategic, intellectual, and moral. Every choice he made was deliberate, every action calculated to protect her and others. Finally, Kale identified a narrow path through the underbrush, leading to an unguarded section of the settlement's walls. "This way," he whispered. Lyra followed, trusting him completely. They moved with silent determination, stepping carefully over roots and stones, blending into the shadows. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the village outskirts. Kale froze, signaling Lyra to stay down. Vampire hunters, human and otherwise, were clashing nearby. The chaos could expose them at any moment. Kale assessed quickly. This was a test, an unavoidable encounter. He would have to act decisively. He led Lyra to a higher vantage point from where they could see the battle below. Humans fought with courage and ingenuity, using traps, strategy, and teamwork to counter the vampire assault. Kale's eyes scanned the battlefield, noting the movements, the weak points, the opportunities to intervene. He understood that every life mattered, and that even a single soldier could make a difference. With a nod to Lyra, he moved into action. Using the shadows, he struck with precision, disabling vampire attackers without drawing attention to themselves. Lyra followed, assisting as best she could, her small form allowing her to move undetected. Together, they became a silent force, human and vampire working in harmony to protect the vulnerable. Hours passed, the battle waning as night fell. The vampire forces retreated, defeated by the combined strength of strategy, courage, and human determination. Kale and Lyra remained hidden, observing the aftermath. The humans of the settlement had survived, thanks in part to the quiet soldier and his unusual companion. Lyra looked at Kale, her eyes filled with admiration and something deeper, trust, respect, and gratitude. You risked everything," she whispered, "just to protect me." Kale met her gaze, expression calm but resolute. "Protection is not about risk, it is about choice. I choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what it means to be human." For the first time, Lyra understood fully. Humans were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most deadly, but they endured. They acted when others hesitated. They made choices rooted in courage, compassion, and responsibility. And in Kale, she had seen all of that manifested in one quiet, determined soldier. As they finally entered the settlement under the cover of night, Lyra felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was not alone. She had someone who would stand by her, fight for her, and guide her. And in that understanding, she began to see the true power of humanity, not in domination, not in strength, but in the courage to protect, to endure, and to act even when the world seemed against them. The settlement welcomed them cautiously, wary of outsiders but relieved to see survivors of the vampire attack. Kale and Lyra were provided shelter, food, and warmth. Lyra finally allowed herself to rest fully, exhausted but safe. Kale, though still alert, finally allowed himself a brief moment of calm. He knew that the challenges were far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a small measure of hope. In the quiet of the settlement, Kale reflected on the journey so far. Every ambush, every escape, every night spent in danger had tested them, yet they had endured. Lyra had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of the world around her. And Kale, in turn, had proven that even in the darkest times, a human could act with courage, compassion, and wisdom to protect life against impossible odds. Lyra approached him quietly, her small hand brushing his arm. "Kale, do you think we can survive the next challenge?" Kale looked at her calm but resolute. "Survival is never certain," he said softly. "But as long as we act with courage, patience, and the determination to protect each other, we have a chance, and that chance is worth everything." Lyra nodded, understanding at last what it meant to follow a human, not because of fear, but because of trust, respect, and the quiet power of a soldier who chose to protect life over everything else. The night deepened, and the settlement settled into uneasy rest. Kale remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the horizon, aware that danger could return at any moment. But he also allowed himself a small sense of pride and hope. Humanity endured, and so did they. The quiet soldier and the tiny vampire had survived another day, proving that courage, strategy, and the choice to act could overcome even the greatest threats. And in that understanding, Lyra felt something she had never known, not fear, not hunger, not loneliness, but belonging. For the first time, she could call someone family, even if that family was forged in quiet courage, careful thought, and unwavering protection. The journey was far from over, but for Kale and Lyra, each step forward was a testament to what humans could achieve. Endurance, intelligence, and above all, the quiet courage to stand for what was right, no matter the cost. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Kale and Lyra left the safety of the settlement. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of smoke from distant fires, a reminder that the world was still dangerous beyond the walls of human habitation. Lyra's small hands clutched the edges of her cloak as they moved through the undergrowth, her red eyes alert to every shadow. She had grown stronger, more confident, but the lessons Kale had taught her, the patience, the observation, the courage, remained her guide. Kale led the way with quiet determination. Each step was deliberate, every movement calculated to minimize risk. Their path took them toward a narrow valley where intelligence had reported increased vampire activity. It was a necessary journey. Human settlements beyond this point were under threat, and the information Kale carried could help prevent devastation. He had trained for missions like this all his life, but nothing had prepared him for the responsibility he felt toward Lyra. Protecting her was no longer a task, it was a choice, and one he would not fail. The valley stretched before them, dark and shadowed. Mist rose from the damp ground, curling around the roots of gnarled trees. Wolves, twisted by hunger and desperation, prowled the edges of their path. Kale paused, scanning the area. "Stay close," he whispered. Lyra nodded, moving silently behind him, her small body almost invisible against the gray mist. As they moved deeper into the valley, a sudden rustle came from the trees ahead. Kale froze, ears twitching. Lyra's heart raced, but she did not move. She trusted him completely. Out of the shadows, a group of vampire scouts emerged, their eyes glowing faintly, teeth bared. They were fast, coordinated, and deadly. Kale's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade. He assessed the situation quickly, noting the positions, the angles, and the timing of their potential attack. "Move behind me," he whispered to Lyra, "and follow exactly as I do." The vampires lunged, and Kale reacted with precision. His movements were fluid, silent, and deadly. He struck to disable, not to kill recklessly, conserving energy for what he knew would come next. Lyra followed his lead, her small size allowing her to slip past unnoticed, striking only when necessary to aid Kale's movements. Together, they became a seamless unit, human strategy and vampire agility working in harmony for survival. Hours passed in tense combat and cautious maneuvering. They managed to evade the main group of vampires, but Kale knew the valley was crawling with more predators, waiting to trap them. He led Lyra to a narrow cave hidden behind a waterfall, a natural sanctuary that offered temporary safety. Inside, the sound of rushing water drowned out all other noise, and the cold spray kept them alert but safe. Lyra collapsed against the cave wall, exhausted but unafraid. "Kale, you never stop," she whispered, awe in her voice. Kale knelt beside her, his expression calm, eyes alert. "Stopping doesn't solve anything," he replied softly. "We endure because we must. We act because others cannot. That is how we survive." Lyra considered this, her small body trembling slightly, not from fear but from understanding. She had learned that survival was more than strength. It was intelligence, patience, courage, and the choice to act. Kale embodied all of it. And in following him, she realized she could be more than prey or target. She could be part of something greater, guided by human wisdom and moral courage. The next day, Kale led them through a series of hidden paths he had memorized, each one bringing them closer to the human settlement they had been aiming for. The terrain grew more treacherous. Fallen trees, slick rocks, and narrow cliffs made every step perilous. Kale moved with calm precision, guiding Lyra through each obstacle. She mirrored his movements, slowly learning the subtle ways humans adapted to survive in dangerous environments. As they neared the settlement, a distant howl echoed through the valley. Kale froze. Lyra instinctively crouched behind him. The sound was not ordinary, it carried a predatory intelligence, a hunger that had been sharpened by years of hunting. Kale's jaw tightened. This was the final test, the moment when human courage would be weighed against relentless darkness. From the shadows, a massive vampire emerged, taller and more imposing than any they had faced before. Its eyes glowed red with hunger and cunning. It had sensed Kale and Lyra, drawn by the scent of life and the promise of easy prey. Kale assessed the creature calmly. It was strong, fast, and dangerous. But he had something the vampire did not: human ingenuity, patience, and the willingness to fight not for glory but for life. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Lyra. She nodded, trusting him completely. The vampire charged, faster than thought, claws extended. Kale sidestepped, delivering a precise strike that threw it off balance. He moved with grace, each motion calculated, each strike deliberate. Lyra watched, heart pounding, as the quiet soldier fought with the precision of someone who had mastered both body and mind. His strategy was flawless, but the battle was far from over. The vampire recovered quickly, its eyes narrowing in anger. It lunged again, more aggressively this time. Kale did not hesitate. He drew Lyra close, guiding her movements, ensuring she stayed safe while continuing the fight. Every strike, every dodge, every decision was part of a larger plan. Humans, he knew, survived not through raw power, but through intelligence, endurance, and the ability to act decisively in the face of overwhelming danger. The battle raged on for hours. Kale's calm demeanor never faltered, but fatigue pressed against him like a heavy weight. Lyra remained close, learning, mimicking, and assisting in ways her small frame allowed. Together, they created a dynamic that no vampire had anticipated. The predator underestimated the quiet human and the fragile vampire working as one, and that mistake proved fatal. Finally, Kale seized the opportunity he had been waiting for. Using a combination of speed, strategy, and timing, he struck the vampire with a precise blow that incapacitated it, forcing it back into the shadows. Lyra moved with him, ensuring the creature could not rise again. They had won this battle, but Kale knew the war was far from over. Lyra's eyes were wide with awe and fear. "Kale, you risked everything," she whispered. Kale knelt beside her, expression calm but eyes intense. "Protection is not about risk," he said softly. "It is about choice. I choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what it means to be human." Lyra considered his words, understanding fully now what human courage truly meant. Strength alone was not enough. Humans survived because they acted with intelligence, patience, and moral clarity. Kale had demonstrated all of these qualities in the most extreme circumstances, and in his quiet, unwavering determination, she found safety, guidance, and the beginnings of family. As night fell, they reached the settlement at last. The gates were heavily guarded, humans wary of outsiders, even ones who had survived such battles. Kale approached with calm authority, his presence alone signaling purpose. The guards allowed them in after brief inspection, and the settlement offered shelter, warmth, and safety. For the first time in many days, Lyra could rest fully, feeling the comfort of a place that was protected and alive. Kale remained vigilant, though, aware that danger could return at any moment. He had fought, protected, and guided, but his responsibility was far from over. Humans endured not because they sought glory, but because they understood the importance of every life. Lyra's life, fragile yet resilient, was his responsibility, and he would not falter. In the quiet of the settlement, Lyra finally spoke with certainty. "Kale, I think I understand now. Humans, you are strong, stronger than anyone believed." Kale looked at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "Strength," he said softly, "is not about power alone. It is about courage, endurance, and the choice to act for others. That is what makes us human." Lyra nodded, feeling a warmth she had never known. She had been alone, abandoned, and hunted all her life. But here, with Kale, she found protection, trust, and belonging. She understood now that family was not just blood or species. It was choice, loyalty, and courage. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra adapted to life in the settlement under Kale's guidance. She grew stronger, faster, and wiser, but she never forgot the lessons he had taught her. Kale continued to train, guide, and protect her, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. Their bond deepened, no longer defined by predator and prey, but by trust, mutual respect, and the quiet courage that had carried them through impossible odds. Word spread of their deeds, of the quiet soldier and the tiny vampire who had survived against overwhelming danger. The people of the settlement admired Kale, not for glory, but for his unwavering courage, strategic brilliance, and moral clarity. Lyra, once fragile and alone, became a symbol of the strength found in trust, learning, and humanity's unique capacity to nurture and protect. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant streaks of red and gold, Lyra approached Kale. Her small hand brushed his arm gently. "Kale, do you think we can face whatever comes next?" Kale looked out toward the horizon, calm and resolute. "We will face it," he said softly. "Not because it is easy, but because we must. Humanity endures not by running, not by hiding, but by acting, protecting, and surviving. And as long as we stand together, we have a chance at everything." Lyra smiled, understanding fully. She had found more than safety. She had found family, guidance, and the quiet strength of a human who embodied courage, patience, and moral clarity. She had learned that humans survived because they acted decisively, because they endured, and because they chose to protect life even in the darkest circumstances. Kale and Lyra stood together on the settlement's outer walls, looking over the lands they had traversed, the dangers they had overcome, and the lives they had protected. The journey had been long, perilous, and exhausting, but it had forged a bond stronger than fear, blood, or species. They were no longer soldier and vampire. They were family, chosen and earned, built on trust, courage, and the quiet power of humanity. In the coming days, Kale would continue to defend the settlement, and Lyra would grow into a survivor, guided by his wisdom. Together, they would face new threats, new dangers, and new challenges. But one truth remained immutable. Humanity, even in its quietest moments, could shine brilliantly. And in the bond between a quiet soldier and a tiny vampire, the world had witnessed the enduring strength of courage, compassion, and chosen family. For Kale, the mission had begun as a task, a duty, but it had become something greater, a test of human spirit, morality, and courage. And in protecting Lyra, he had proven that even the smallest acts of bravery could echo far beyond the immediate danger, inspiring trust, loyalty, and hope in a world that had long forgotten it. Lyra, once alone and fragile, had found not just a protector, but a guide, a mentor, and a family member who would stand with her through all trials. The quiet soldier had risked everything, and in doing so had created something extraordinary, a bond that defied species, fear, and the darkness of a broken world. And as the stars appeared in the night sky above the settlement, Lyra whispered softly, almost to herself, "Kale, thank you, you are my family." Kale smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever vigilant yet at peace. "And you are mine," he replied. Together they looked out over the lands beyond, knowing that challenges awaited, but confident that courage, intelligence, and the quiet power of humanity would guide them through whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but in that moment Kale and Lyra had found something unbreakable: trust, loyalty, and the enduring bond of chosen family. And in that bond, the world glimpsed the true greatness of humanity, quiet, resilient, and endlessly courageous.